At various points in recent times, it felt as if Minnesota was about to become Minne-so-gone as it relates to professional sports teams. If owners weren't flirting with other cities, they were straight up asking a commissioner to erase their franchise off the face of the earth. All of these issues have been stadium arena related. Usually, owners who were either out of towners or just not well liked by locals would make absurd demands that went over as well as Norm Green in a Coca-Cola factory. If you don't get that reference, I'll explain it in a bit. Anyway, the thing about Minnesotans is that they are as nice as advertised, but they're pretty happy just doing their own thing. It is not like the South where people are equally as nice and friendly, but they're also trying to get all up in your business. The other thing about Minnesotans is that if you want something, you better just come out and say it because they have zero interest in playing games with you. Additionally, you better damn well sure need what you are asking them for. Minnesotans are nice, but they are not stupid. If they see you don't need what you are asking for, then they ain't handing it out to you. In many ways, it is the antithesis of professional sports where team owners want to play games and make demands for things they do not actually need. The approach has unfortunately created a lot of strife for Minnesota teams over the years. For a state that loves its sports and loves its team, that relationship has not always been reciprocal. I am Cheyenne Hollis, this is The Touchback, and today, here is how Minnesota almost lost all of its sports teams. I'm so gone, Let's start with one of the Minnesota teams that actually did get away in what has to be one of the more infuriating relocations in professional sports history, a move that infuriates even neutral fans. The North Stars leaving the North was easily avoidable and ultimately pointless. In the late 1980s, the Gunn brothers wanted to move the Minnesota North Stars to the Bay Area. The NHL blocked that relocation attempt and after some haggling instead let the Guns buy an expansion team that would become the San Jose Sharks while simultaneously selling the North Stars to a new ownership group. Self-promotion alert, you can learn all about the San Jose Sharks weird expansion in the video right there upper right hand corner of your screen. Moving on, the franchise was sold to Howard Baldwin and Maurice Bellsberg, but eventually Norm Green wormed his way into the picture and would become majority owner when Baldwin wanted to go out and buy the Pittsburgh Penguins. Given the team's uncertain arena arrangement and Norm Green's just awfulness as a human being, this situation quickly turned sour. In the short time Green spent as the North Stars owner, he complained about low attendance, which happened years before, and when he wasn't even owner of the franchise. Green did not like the fact a sexual harassment lawsuit was filed against him despite him being a well-known sexual harasser. What's more, his wife went out to threaten to relocate the North Stars if the lawsuit proceeded. Green also refused to play in the newly built Target Center because it was a Coca-Cola building and the North Stars happened to be sponsored by Pepsi. There were also a number of other dumb reasons he did not go to the Target Center. That brings us to the main issue between Minnesota and the North Stars. The Metropolitan Sports Center had a great run as a hockey barn, but it needed to be replaced by the early 90s. Green, though, never had a realistic way of getting this done. If it wasn't the Target Center's deal with Coca-Cola, it was wanting to build a massive casino and skyway that would connect a new arena to the Mall of America, a project that was already famously over budget. Of course, given Green's panache for sexual harassment and being just a bad dude overall, why the NHL was so keen to have him own the North Stars in the first place remains a mystery. Better yet, why let Baldwin jump ship from Minnesota to Pittsburgh? Then again, Baldwin had his own issues with the Penguins, so it's not like that was a great marriage. Man, the NHL was just letting any douche who claimed to have money own an NHL team in the 1990s. What a ridiculous time. As for Green, he was going on the bridge burning spree to end all bridge burning sprees in Minnesota. This would eventually lead to him announcing the North Stars would move to Dallas. This remains one of the NHL's most shameful moments, abandoning a state where hockey is king, where you want to have a professional hockey team based Minnesota. There was a silver lining here perhaps. Karma eventually caught up to Green as a string of business failures meant he needed to sell the Stars a few years later. As for Minnesota, the Wild would begin play in 2000 at a brand new arena in St. Paul, so it did kind of work out, although I'm guessing Minnesotans would love to have that 1999 NHL championship the Stars did win with Mike Modano. The Met Center was not the only sporting venue in Bloomington that needed replacing. The Met Stadium was always an odd fit for the Minnesota Vikings. Built as a minor league baseball stadium, football didn't quite work here, and also no one was taking care of this facility like at all in the 1970s. As the Vikings began to have more success on the field, they began making rumblings about wanting a new domed stadium off the field. This eventually led to them casually dropping that they would be willing to move if they didn't get the new stadium built. Birmingham, Alabama was always regularly mentioned as a potential destination for the Vikings. You'll find varying accounts on just how close the Purple People Eaters were to leaving Minnesota for Alabama. Some say it was close to being a done deal. Others say it was just posturing by the team. Ultimately, the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome was built and relocation talks went away, at least for a little bit. Getting that building over the line required then NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle to promise the state government that the team would not relocate so long as it had a lease in place. On the surface, this was a common sense arrangement that should have offered the team some security, but also maybe get something a little more tangible than just a promise from the commissioner. Things changed drastically when Red McCombs bought the Vikings in 1998. The belief was that he wanted to move the team to his hometown of San Antonio. Of course, he came out and said his new goal was to get a stadium built in Minnesota, but fans were skeptical given how frequently football teams swapped cities during the 1990s. McCombs' approach to getting a new stadium in Minnesota certainly did not endear himself to locals. He just made a bunch of demands, insisting he wanted this, that, and the other, while completely ignoring the fact he had a long-term lease in place that he could not break. In fact, just about every time he made a demand for a new stadium, locals were quick to point out just how many years left on the Metrodome lease remained. The battle between McCombs and Minnesota really ratcheted up when the Texan had the Vikings play a preseason game down in San Antonio. This was a not so subtle threat on relocation. The early 2000s saw an almost annual tradition between owner and state in which McCombs would present some wildly unfavorable stadium plan to local officials, get rebuffed, threaten to move or sell, and finally be reminded that the Vikings couldn't go anywhere because of their lease. Despite all that, there were some in the NFL who felt as if it was only a matter of time before the Vikings did move, and most likely moved to Los Angeles. According to Kevin Seifert, league officials even made a preliminary plan to place the Vikings in the NFC West in 2003. Those plans were never needed. McCombs eventually gave up and punted on the Vikings altogether, selling them to Ziggy Wilf in 2005. The new owner was also an out-of-towner, but one who at least seemed to better understand the lay of the land. He would go on to honor the Metrodome lease, never made any public threats on relocation or anything of the sort, and eventually did get a new stadium built for the Vikings in Minnesota. Speaking of leases, the state of Minnesota was pretty confident in its stance against the Vikings because it had already beat Twins ownership and Major League Baseball in court about that team's lease at the Metrodome. Some people have gone on to try and claim MLB wasn't serious about contraction. If that was the case though, why offer Carl Pohlad $250 million to contract the Twins? That doesn't really make sense. And why try to get out of the lease at the Metrodome if you aren't serious about it? The state's victory over baseball's cartel proved to be hugely important in not only keeping the Twins in Minnesota, but eventually getting a new stadium there built. It didn't happen overnight, but an acceptable deal was eventually reached between the Pohlad family and Hennepin County. Of course, had Pohlad not been such a douche, it probably wouldn't have been such a contentious process. After a paltry 13 years of playing at the Metrodome, Carl Pohlad came out and said the building was economically obsolete and demanded a new stadium be built for his baseball team. The argument did not resonate with the people of Minnesota, who pointed out that it wasn't all that old, and more importantly, the team had a lease at the Metrodome to oblige by. Prior to the attempted contraction, Pohlad made no headway on getting that new stadium he demanded built. The state government actually did some research and basically figured out that most potential relocation cities weren't viable for the Twins, who needed to have something lined up by 1998 when they could opt out of the Metrodome lease. A government report identified Sacramento and Orlando as the most likely destinations for the Twins relocation, but those areas had issues with nearby ball clubs that would try to block the move. Elsewhere, other markets would need a local ownership group to step up and be able to pass a funding bill, which was by no means a slam dunk. That played out firsthand in Greensboro, North Carolina. A local group there pledged to buy the Minnesota Twins, assuming they could get a referendum passed that would approve stadium financing. The referendum was soundly rejected by those in Greensboro. The Twins remained in the Metrodome lease, and Pohlad became public enemy #1 in Minnesota. St. Paul also made a pitch for the Twins, with Minnesota Timberwolves owner Glenn Taylor promising to purchase the franchise, assuming he could get a stadium finance referendum passed there. It did not pass. Pohlad flailed around some more before eventually stumbling upon plans that would become Target Field in 2005. On the court, the Minneapolis Lakers were the first dynasty in NBA history. Off the court, they were a money loser and didn't even have a home in Minnesota. The best venue for basketball at the time, the Minneapolis Auditorium, only allowed the Lakers to play there when a convention wasn't in town. In 1960, the Lakers did move to Los Angeles in a relocation that was oddly well received by all parties involved. Here's what Minneapolis Tribune columnist Dick Cullum wrote about the situation. "We must face the fact that the Lakers did not have a fair chance here. They were denied suitable facilities. It was nobody's fault, only a lacking of suitable facilities. On a comparison of facilities alone, the move is justified." Interestingly enough, the Lakers would go on to play several neutral site games in Minneapolis throughout the 1960s. Gone but not forgotten, I suppose. The NBA would return to Minneapolis in 1989 in the form of the Minnesota Timberwolves. They spent their first season at the Metrodome before moving into the brand new Target Center the following year. The arena was privately financed, but would become a very public headache. The owners of the Timberwolves could not afford the mortgage on the Target Center, asking the state for a bailout, something the public had very little interest in providing. Maybe folks would have been a little more receptive to the request had those running the Timberwolves not framed it as a do this or the team will leave scenario. With no Target Center bailout forthcoming, relocation talks picked up steam, with Nashville and New Orleans seen as the most likely destinations for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Eventually, boxing promotion outfit Top Rank reached a deal to buy the team, with their plan to move it down to the Big Easy. The NBA Relocation Committee would actually block the planned sale to Top Rank. They were extremely concerned over the group's financing plans, which were incredibly dubious, with many backers never identified. The league actually took things a step further, requesting an injunction on any potential sale of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Basically, the NBA said if someone was going to buy this franchise, they needed to keep it in town. Glenn Taylor would eventually emerge buying the team. Meanwhile, the city ended up acquiring the Target Center after all, and the Timberwolves carried on as is until recently. In 2021, Taylor revealed he was going to sell the Timberwolves to a group fronted by Alex Rodriguez over a multi-year stretch. Then, in 2024, the deal blew up spectacularly. When the group missed the final purchase payment, Taylor announced the Timberwolves were no longer for sale. He also revealed that A-Rod's ownership group had potentially planned to relocate the franchise. So it goes. There is a very real scenario in which Minnesota loses the Vikings, the Twins, Timberwolves, in addition to the North Stars and Lakers. For the T-Wolves, it required the NBA to intervene on the market's behalf, while a lease agreement with the Twins forced them to stick around town. The Vikings never got as far along in the relocation process as those other teams, but the possibility of moving was there, and the NFL did seem to have some plans in place should they have left Minnesota. All of these situations, though, were a byproduct of bad or underfunded ownership groups making impractical demands of Minnesotans who had no desire to play their stupid little games. They really should have known better, though. This is a collection of pragmatic people who have no desire to play stupid games, especially with out-of-towners. The Lakers and North Stars did leave town, but were thankfully replaced. As for Minnesota, it remains one of the most passionate and loyal groups of sports fans around. They just don't need the newest or best stadiums. Oh yeah, they also expect you to honor your lease agreements. Besides, if it wasn't for Minnesota, we wouldn't have epic sports moments like this.
Gonna beat the ugly bartender into a bundle and laugh all the way doing the rock rumble.
No, that wasn't it. Let's try this again.
You did great, Lou.
Thanks.
Closer but fictional.
Into deep left center for Mitchell, and we'll see you tomorrow.
There we go. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Modell Law and how it can be used to keep sports teams in their respective hometowns, video lower right hand corner of your screen. And if you're interested in what happens to deactivated sports teams, video upper right hand corner. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.